Hi, I'm Sarah Holderness, and I'm an author at Pluralsight since 2015. And if you're from Orlando and you've heard of Code School, I started out there and then they were acquired by Pluralsight. And so I continue making courses at Pluralsight on Python and Java. I just put out a practical Python for beginners course last year, and then I've been working on just like interactive type of things there. I have 3 kids under 5, and so I just came back from maternity leave, and I wanted to know, what's new in Python now that I've been out for a couple months and been distracted with that. And so I wanted to know where Python stands with other developers. And so I was just kind of looking things up, and that led me to the 2021 Stack Overflow Developer Survey. If you've seen that before, they do it annually, and they got about 80,000 developers to answer questions on what tools they're using, what they'd like to use, and how they learn and improve as developers. So the Python specific results were that Python passed SQL to become the 3rd most popular programming language. And it's the most wanted language for its 5th year, meaning if it's not what developers use at work, it's what they most want to use if they aren't already using it. And JetBrains also does a survey starting a couple of years ago. And this year they surveyed 31,000 developers from about 180 countries, and they asked Python specific questions to the developers that said they used Python as one of their 3 main languages. So to those people, they asked, what do you use Python for? And you can see all of the different things Python is used for, web development being the most common, data analysis and machine learning, programming of web parsers, scrapers, and crawlers, automation scripts and system admin, and then software testing, automated tests. So not really any surprises there for me, but just to kind of see the wide use of what Python is used for. And then what frameworks and libraries do you use in addition to Python? And then you can see what some of the popular frameworks and libraries are across all of Python. So you see the requests library, Pillow, which is image processing, Scrapey, Tinker, which is GUI related stuff, Async.io, which I haven't used before, but I think is for asynchronous tasks, whatever they may be. And then PyQt is other GUI things. Pygame, obviously, and then AIO HTTP, I think, is for WebSockets. Also haven't used that, but you can kind of see all the different applications that people are using Python for. And then what web frameworks or libraries do you use in addition to Python? So since web development, specifically what web frameworks or libraries do you use in addition to Python? So Flask is just such a general framework that you can use it for anything. So that's interesting that it's the #1 framework versus Django and Fast API, which are more of like batteries included type of frameworks. And so interesting that people use Flask probably for a wide variety of things. And then data science frameworks, there's NumPy, Pandas, Matplotlib, TensorFlow, SciPy, scikit-learn. So not too much new there. And then just looking at all of these Python libraries that people use just kind of reminded me of what this XKCD comic, that people say that Python has libraries for almost anything. And in this comic, they're like, oh, even flying, you just import anti-gravity and you can fly. So I think sometimes when you're wondering what language to start with, or why Python, people like Python, they like that it can be used for anything. And there's a library for anything. So going back to the Stack Overflow developer survey, one of the things they focus on was how people learn how to code. And so they asked questions about that. And 60% of people learn how to code from online resources. And they also separated this by age, showing that younger respondents learn from online resources, whereas older learn from school and books. So it's just a slight difference there. But when I was thinking about how to learn online, and when I think about the courses that I'm going to create, I was thinking about this metaphor that learning Python fundamentals is like laying the foundation for a shed. And the reason I'm saying shed instead of a house or a building is that when you learn the fundamentals, you want to then take those fundamentals and apply them to something that's interesting to you. So your shed is like one of your first programs. You want to learn the basic fundamentals and then get to building your shed. But you still need some foundation for your shed or it will fall over. And so this is a small plug for my course, but just an example of thinking about learning online. So my course is Practical Python for Beginners, and you can see it's less than 2 hours, and it just covers data types, conditionals, lists and iteration, dictionaries, and JSON and functions. And it's called Practical Python because right after we learn a concept like conditionals, then we apply it to making a practical program like a rock, paper, scissors game, a mortgage payment calculator, requesting daily weather from the Open Weather Map API, and things like that. So just to come full circle back to what do you use Python for in the Stack Overflow survey? So after you cover the fundamentals in whatever course or book or way you're learning Python, then you can pick one of these topics that interest you most and continue your learning there. And so that is kind of, sorry, that was an example I was considering doing next. So I guess that is kind of a philosophy for learning Python. And if you're wondering what I'm talking about a little bit is like, consider you are learning about lists for the first time. And a person tells you, okay, lists are immutable, which means da 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 da. A beginner doesn't necessarily care that they're immutable. They just want to know what the basics of storing things in sequential order are and how to add and access items and remove them, and not necessarily taking a deep dive into Python. Anyway, so now I wanted to continue with an example of teaching the requests, something about doing a request from the request library. So again, that was one of the main libraries that was used in the survey. And so if you think about teaching how to use the request library to a beginner, you want to apply the fundamentals that they've learned. So hopefully they've learned how to install packages with pip and import packages, and maybe even you've covered a virtual environment to do those. So these are the foundation, part of their foundation that they've already done. Then maybe to create the URL for the open weather map API, they've learned how to combine strings, and maybe they've learned, you've taken them through what the open weather map API is and how to do a request there and what the response looks like. Then we use the request library to do a get on the URL. It returns the response and you get it in JSON format. And understanding the JSON format is like looking at a nested dictionary of lists and dictionaries. And then you can show how to get the description from that JSON response by accessing the inner key weather and then a list and the inner key description. And then finally, you print today's forecast. So that's a practical example of how to put the fundamentals to use in a short program and how to use the requests library. So basically, I hope what you take away is what Python is used for, the different libraries that are used, and how to maybe introduce somebody that's new to Python to what the fundamentals are, and how to get them interested is maybe just to teach the bare bones basics and then let them decide what they want to learn and apply Python to next. So yeah, if anybody has any questions or has any feedback about online learning and beginner courses in general, I'm planning a sequel to the course, which is going to have lots of programming examples that build on the fundamentals.
I have a question, if I may ask. Great. Is Kaggle a good resource for a beginner?
I think Kaggle, so like the data set resource, I think that it can be a little overwhelming, but I think if you're looking for data, I think sometimes they curate them by beginners too, right? I don't know. I'm not super familiar with Kaggle. Maybe somebody else that is can reply to that.
Yeah, I can say something to Kaggle. Kaggle is, there's a lot with Kaggle. There certainly can be. They host their own hackathons. They have their own learning system, but for someone who is just starting, the biggest asset that Kaggle has that I would reach out to Kaggle to get are some good, well-known standard data sets. You have things like the MNIST handwriting set if you're getting into some computer vision. If you want to do some data analysis, they will have all of the standard data sets that are very clean, well known. If you're talking to anyone, anyone else will be familiar with things like the Boston housing data set. And then when you're more comfortable in your skills, like you've gotten this core under your belt, then you can go into less structured, less less well known and start having fun with it.
Great, thank you for the answers and thank you for the presentation.
Thanks.
What's an example of one of the programs that you've created that you get the most utility out of, and do you utilize web scrapers and crawlers often, and if so, in what fashion?
Great question. I don't know if I have a good answer for that. I'm trying to think.
Are there any like tasks you've automated or
Yeah,
really
so
complicated programs?
so one of the last things I did was we had interactive courses where you would ask the learner to write in code and fill in code to, like, let's say you had a function and it was just, let me start over. Like, let's say you just want the beginner that's learning Python for the very first time to write print hello world. Okay, then we would verify that the user actually did that. So we would have to write tests to check that the user wrote that code. So we had to write tests that checked and verified user input, and then also give them feedback that would be helpful, like you missed this part or you didn't do this. So.
And it was like parsing the ASM tree or whatever of the code itself, right?
Yeah,
And
for
that's
some of,
pretty cool.
yeah, for some of that, we had to use the syntax tree, but the AST.
Yeah. See how they wrote the code and all that.
And then the next question was about web scraping, and I haven't really done much of that. I mean, yeah, not of like public websites. I think I've used it before to like automate inputting a form where I had to like copy data from one thing to the other, and it was like a manual process, and I was like, oh, I can use Selenium to press some buttons. But yeah, that's about it for me for web scraping.
Okay. Thank you for the answers. Then of course.
Yes, hello.
Hi.
Hey, this is Joshua. Good evening. I appreciate you guys putting on this meetup. This has been awesome. I do have a question. I'm completely green, new to Python, new to computer coding and all that stuff. And I just picked up this Python all-in-one book for dummies. It's a 7 books in one. And in the introduction, it talks about how you can be completely green. This book is for someone that knows how to turn a computer on and knows how to use its basic functions. Anyone can learn Python according to the introduction to this book. I'm just wondering, has anyone utilized this as a resource? And what can you say to someone that's starting off and being self-taught with their own material? How would you guide them in this process, in this journey?
That's a great question. I am not familiar with this book. Yeah, and it's hard to go back to a total beginner's mindset, I guess. So, I mean, I don't know, just like installing Python with, actually, Michael, didn't you do meetup talk where you installed it and used idle and did like the very basics kind of?
Yeah, back when we were still doing things in person, I had a couple of 0 to using Flask actually kind of talks. I think they're still available on the Python, the Orlando Python YouTube channel as a beginner series. But it depends. The first thing I would do, it depends on your operating system. If you're on Windows, you can actually go into the Microsoft Store and they have Python for you in the store. The nice thing with that is that you choose 3.10 and then it through the store will automatically keep the bug fix updates coming for you. And then it gives you idle and your command line in PowerShell commands for you as well. Idle, IDLE, is this, it gives you the Python command line without actually having to use a command line. And it has some nice printing and some other niceties for you there. That's certainly an easy way to get started. And that comes with every version of Python. Once you get used to writing things in there, you can actually start writing code files, and there are text editors for you. You can obviously use anything that's on your computer now, like you can use Notepad or something, but there are also developer tools like VS Code that are available on every platform that give you a lot of power tools that will make your coding easier.
Yeah, I think too, once you get Python installed and you can write print hello world and do some basic math operations, that is like getting over a huge hurdle, in the learning journey. It's just about setup sometimes. And so yeah, I actually haven't been there in a while, but I know Code Academy had some stuff where you can try it in the browser without having to install Python locally. And so sometimes that can help because you can just write a few lines of code.
Python is easy, relatively easy enough to get running, but I think to more some of the compiled languages like Java or C, C++, where using learning sites like Pluralsight that you make content for, or Code Academy, they will take care of all of that on the back end for you. And yeah, it is just in your browser. On top of them being a learning platform, it's Sarah is doing the hard part for you.
Yeah. I think I don't know. I've been wondering if my Python course on Pluralsight, the first one I created, is still good. I went to Reddit the other day and it was as one of the resources. So I don't know. I should go look and see if it's still working.
Hey, Joshua, what did you want to learn by learning Python? Like, was there something in particular you wanted to try and tackle, or you just wanted to get started?
Yeah, great question. I just wanted to get started. I'm interested in expanding my learning. I see the way, we've been in the wave of computer science, data science, everything's been computers, but I felt like my knowledge in this field was completely, I was oblivious to it all. I just use a computer for software, apps, but not utilizing it at a higher level. And I was thinking about, changing careers. And if it's something I want to change careers into that interests me, it would be in computers. So I was looking at the different books about coding and languages for computers. I got a C++ book on network security just to read and see what I want to get into. And so far, I'm holding on to this Python book. This is the one that's been calling me. And so this is why I'm looking to get into Python. So I just want to learn and see where I can find my area of interest and get into it from there.
Yeah, it's awesome. I think like what Sarah was saying earlier with, her course does it, but just starting to do stuff early on. like don't wait till the end of that book to start programming, I guess is what I'm trying to say. You'll get a lot out of it earlier by just doing things that come to your mind. And oh, I think maybe now I can make tic-tac-toe, or like I could probably make something that does this. Like just try it and get
Oh,
going.
wow.
That's the way to
Wow.
learn it.
Okay. Okay. So do you now is okay, and you just recommend just using the software that he mentioned, Idle? I mean
Yeah,
Python
yeah,
is how to get started.
exactly. Get into it as early as you can and just have fun,
Nice, nice. I appreciate that. That put a smile on my face.
Speaking of like I guess tinkering with things, I don't know if you play Wordle. But Will plays Wordle every day. It's this new like word game kind of, I don't even know what to compare it
Never
to.
heard of
But
it until now. I'm looking it up right now.
yeah, it's like a word jumble thing. Anyway, Will was like, just like, I wonder if I could write a Python thing for this. Anyway, so he did that. But just
Yeah, it's like this game's stupid simple. And I was like, I feel like this would be really easy in Python. And it ended up being like less than 50 lines of code, not including the giant word list with a couple thousand words in it, but that was a different file. So it was just like, oh, this is cool and easy, but I was just farting around watching TV and I was like, I'll bet I could do this, and did it. It was fun to play with.
Yeah.
Got to do some new things. So.
that's a good
So you
example.
just so you thought about if you can make a replica of the game and you just made a replica of it?
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, it's not perfect, but the gist of it's there, and it works. And I can play more than one Wordle a day because in this stupid game, they only let you do one a day. And I'm really annoyed by that. Now I can do as many as I want.
Are you saying you created the interface as well? Like you basically created a game?
Yeah. So that's the part that's lacking a little bit. You know what? I'm on my computer right here. I can share my screen. So it's just in the console or whatever. And it's not quite the same as the New York Times version, if you will, but it gets the job done. Hold on. So let me pull up the real one. Hold on, let me make sure it's not showing the Wordle of the day. I don't want to spoil it for anybody if anybody's going to go and play.
Yeah.
It's a big deal. You don't want to spoil Wordle for anybody.
Does anybody actually play?
Okay, cool.
Michael, do you know what we're talking about?
I was like, what the hell is
Word
going
through
on?
osmosis.
Okay.
All right. So where is it? All right. So I don't know. Can y'all see my screen? All right. So this is Wordle. You have to guess the word. There's one word every day. It's always 5 letters. And if you guess like a word,
start with like ready.
All right. So I'm gonna guess store.
Okay.
So wow, this was an incredible guess off the bat. If the color turns green, that means that letter is in the correct spot. Okay. And if it gets yellow, it means that letter is in the word somewhere, but it's the incorrect spot. And so you get 6 guesses.
We get the
blah, blah, blah.
gist.
Yeah,
Okay,
so
go to that.
So I did not create this whole.
Yeah, that's
rigmarole,
the actual Wordle.
from New York Times. And they give you a little keyboard and show you the letters that are not in there. I didn't do any of that. But
let's see the Python
mine,
version.
you're just hold on to your butts, everybody. It's about to blow your minds here.
Okay, you Command plus.
Oh yeah, I can find it. It's a little bigger. No,
that does not work. Okay.
No, nope. Okay, there we go. All right, clear. All right, so we are in my Wordle folder because my name is Will. And let's see, Python game. So you're just saying input a word and you get 6 guesses. So
store.
We'll try to store. Hey, we got the E right, so that it prints out. Yeah, you got 1 letter, and that's about it. So we might try like other words. What else ends with the E? This is my brain turns off when I start playing Wordle. So
Drive.
All right, that's great. All right, so now we got an I. So anyway, that's the gist. And if you get it all right, it would just print all green, and I didn't really do anything else. So I was very excited about that, but because I just got having fun playing it. But the code for it ended up being like really easy. So like this is pretty much the whole thing. My text is probably a little too big now, but I got some code for checking guesses and taking input, and printing, and that's like it. So even with egregious use of white space, it was less than 50 lines of code. So that's exciting to me, but anyway, it was fun to try.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I was very proud of it. I wasn't planning on bragging about this tonight, but Sarah called me out, so thank you for that. Stop by any games here.
Oops, sorry, I pressed the wrong button.
I'm happy to not be recorded.
Oh, I think so. Between Sarah and Will, there are for beginners and providing a path forward, especially when you're just starting, to keep motivation up. Sarah mentioned that when you're doing code, when you're learning, trying to merge it with another interest that you have is going to be a big push to keep you getting past the frustrating moments that everyone experiences when you're learning something new. So you have a vision in your head, you want to do something, and as long as you're okay with it not, maybe it's only 10%, but you still moved a little further in that direction, that will keep you going. And then what Will showed off there is learning through copying. And that's not unique to code. Like when people are learning to paint, they'll copying masterworks essentially to learn techniques. And these are two very different but also valid ways of learning and teaching yourself, because you either have a vision and you want to learn the skills to get there, or you want to practice your skills by building to something that you can compare yourself against. Like, is the snake game actually going to do a game over if I run back into myself? Very easy checks like that. We've got some really interesting comments going on, or comments in the chat here. For example, talking about some text editors for Python. Mentioned VS Code earlier. Idle is a text editor, but it's going to be a little bit different than, say, an IDE, which is an integrated development environment. Someone else mentioned Pycharm, which absolutely is a Python-specific IDE. And these just have a bunch of tools. Pycharm is Python-specific. You can think of it like Xcode for Python or Visual Studio for Python. Xcode primarily being for Swift and Objective-C, and Visual Studio for C, C#, .NET, the Microsoft offerings. We have another one in here of when to make the decision to use Python versus a lower level language, and when the performance difference is worth it.
I feel like on this one, oh god, I muted the wrong. I'm so bad at this. That's why you don't have two computers on Zoom next to each other. I feel like for me, this decision is always like, do I need to use a lower level language? Because I do a lot of C++, which is great. But if I'm doing like web dev and dealing with C++, like I'm gonna have a really bad time. So Python just makes everything go faster, in my opinion, in terms of development time, which is more often than not more important to me than actual, performance time, because odds are the things I'm working on are not going to be used by a couple million people. So like performance isn't necessarily as big of a deal. There's times when it is. And so I might look at something else, but like somebody else commented, there's probably better ways to get around that, even still using Python. So I think it just depends on what you're trying to do. Like if you're just tinkering, it's way more fun to tinker in Python and not write 10,000 lines of boilerplate just to make Wordle and have fun with it. So I use Python whenever I can.
Absolutely back that up. If you've written something large in Python and then you deploy it, you can start, as long as you have good logging in place and start narrowing things down, you can identify the areas that are taking a long time and then seek to optimize just those specific areas. There are other things you could look at. We had a talk a while back about pandas optimizations. There were four ways of running the exact same code in pandas, and they all increased in execution time. And the secret to it was using subsequently less and less Python and relying more on pandas built-in functionality, which leverages NumPy and C under the hood, which is significantly faster than Python for numerical calculations and things in that regard. The comment talking about, as Sarah said at the top, there's practically a library for everything, and had the great XKCD comic in there, import anti-gravity. And fun thing, if you actually run import anti-gravity in Python, it will open a link in your browser to that exact comic. It just got put into Python, which itself, like, it's open source, and they put that in there explicitly for when that comic dropped, because everyone loves XKCD. But the third-party libraries, once you know how to use them and are comfortable with them, in most cases, if you have a very specific problem, like I need to get data from a web page, someone has solved that problem already. You don't need to write that again. It comes more down to the domain knowledge and how you use that information. That is the real power of you as the programmer coming into or the code that you're writing. It's one thing to go, I need information from a website. You as the programmer then go, okay, I have that information. What do I do with it? Yeah, like third-party library ecosystem, it's great. And which makes me all the more interested in that 26% of people that don't use any third-party libraries in the graphs from the Stack Overflow survey. It's just how many people know or have used requests? Like about half. And it goes down, you get into single digits, and then 26% of people don't use third-party libraries. What are you doing?
Yeah, that's a good point. I didn't even think about that. What are they?
They didn't make it past Hello World, so they
Yeah, I guess maybe just learning still, but still, I don't know. Use a random one. I don't know.
I can see when people just like, I just need something to do some very basic level scripting, because Python was originally a scripting language. It's still used as a scripting language. If you can still put your shebang, bin bash or bin Python on the top of your files and use them as scripts. If that's all you need to do, like that's what it was written for. You have file objects, you can read and write and move things. But as soon as you need to do anything involving reaching out the internet for information, doing graphics, you can use tkinter, which is a standard library, but it's insane to me that there are people that just never use any libraries in Python.
Michael, we were talking about this the other day, and this is for everyone, but what would you consider the difference between a script and a program? Because Python's a scripting language, right? But then we were like, well, wait, what's the difference? There's obviously compiled languages versus scripting languages, but I feel like it's so blended these days.
Well, we came up with an answer.
Well, we did, but don't tell him. I want to hear what he said. Don't spoil it.
Sorry.
Man, that is a fantastic question.
Well, I think they're used interchangeably now, like the word program and script. So
yeah,
might be like
I almost think of a script as a single file application that is meant to be run on your computer. Like I can think of like is a lambda a script? Because it's a single, like in most cases, it's a single file. Lambdas can get crazy. Don't I'm basic. You're running this on it's a cron job. Like cron jobs run scripts. They don't run applications. But then you have a lambda, and if it's on a cron job, does that make it a script? I tend to think of them more as just like single file applications that don't have a while true loop either. As soon as you get a while true loop or you're deploying a package, I think of that as a program, but with Python, because it's not a compiled or it just in time compiling, it's like it's weird where that line falls. It's
Yeah.
Your thought
that's weird.
process is very similar to the conversation we were having the other day. It was just like, I feel like there's an answer here, but none of this makes sense.
I
Yeah.
feel very strongly if there's a shebang at the top of your main.py, it's a script, and that
Yes, I agree with that completely.
anything else is a gray area.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, you could shebang everything if you wanted to, though. I'm gonna deploy some web apps that are with shebangs at the top. And I think what did we come up with the other day? There was like, if you intend it to be long running, like a web application or something like that, where it's like hosting server code, then that's an application. And a script is like, you're gonna fire it off and it's gonna do something and then quit. And maybe that's not true either, but that was one idea that we came up with. I like the single file thing came up as well. It's like, maybe it's just this one thing and it does something and then it's done.
But you can run a script with a cron job. And
Yeah, I mean, you can run anything with a cron job.
Well, or you could have it, I guess, never mind. You could have a script that is constantly running with a timer and looking for something.
Maybe that makes it an application. I don't know.
And does
And
that
then
make
I think about lambdas as a great example of just how gray of an area that is, because a lambda or an Azure function, any of the like the serverless technologies, it's not serverless, and it's not just running once necessarily. It's being loaded in and then running a main function whenever some trigger happens. But
Right.
is your code the application, or is some larger code running your script?
That's the application. Oh, okay. Yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah, that's funny.
Comment saying that hackathons, kind of like thinking back to the question about Kaggle, hackathons being an excellent kind of third route of keeping your interest up in Python and other languages as you're using it, because it's very hard to like. Hackathons foster a spirit of cooperation and competition, which definitely can be a healthy driver for a lot of people. I can think that for people who are comfortable going out in person right now, I know that there is a hackathon coming up that's sponsored by the Orlando Magic that I took part in a while, a precursor of a while back with them. I would highly recommend that. And there's a ticket fee, but it's for 3 days of free food and getting to talk to. If you're interested in sports and you have any interest in code, I would absolutely take a look at that.
Was Shaq there last time?
No, unfortunately.
What is that?
Probably an Isleworth.
Yeah.
What is the name of that hackathon?
There's the Orlando Magic Hackathon. It used to be called Hack the Arena. It may still be called that. I did a little check there, but I see a reference to 2016. Would love to if you can provide a link, that'd be awesome. Yeah, I'll look and drop a link in the chat.
I do think though, it could be overwhelming for a beginner in Python. I don't know. That's just me. Like, if you don't you feel like you kind of have to go in with some sort of like
working knowledge?
I don't know.
I don't think you have to be advanced, but I feel like
with
it's
the
not a day
hackathons?
one thing, maybe.
Yeah, it definitely wouldn't be a day one thing, but it could be really interesting for a beginner to see how people are working and kind of give an idea. Like one of the big things with hackathons is you just have new ideas and how people are solving projects. And even though that's not necessarily writing code, that's a very big part of being a programmer, like just being in the world. Like we're here, programmers are here to solve problems. Whether that is, I wish for this cool thing to exist and it doesn't exist, therefore I will make it. That is a legitimate problem.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. You could always just observe or like assist or whatever. Yeah.
It is called the Orlando Magic Innovation Challenge. Gonna drop a link to it in the chat here. That's coming up at the beginning of April, and it's in the Amway Center. So if you want to, even if you just want to see what to get a different experience at the Amway Center, it could be interesting there. But yeah, just seeing how people work, seeing how people approach different problems. Hackathons are fantastic because you just have to come up with an idea. You have to make a minimum viable product, proof of concept, very quickly, and I think it's also a very good skill, beginner skill, to get used to a minimum viable product, what that means, what is the least amount of effort and complexity that I need to get an answer as to whether continuing with a project or an idea, whether it's valid. Because if you can you don't want to get so far into a project and realize, oh, the basic premise of this doesn't work and I put in all of this work. That is another skill that's very useful, especially when you're starting. Oh, this is actually a great question. So after learning basic skills, basic language skills, what are the best next steps? Because that's a big hurdle. Is like, hey, I feel comfortable with the language. I know what these basic features are. I can make a class. I've learned all about foobar and these basic things. Where to go next?
Yeah, I think that what I was trying to say in the talk was to choose what interests you most. And that's why I was sharing that survey that what do people use Python for? Number one was web development, then it was like data science and machine learning were 2 and 3, and then it was like automation type stuff. And so I think if any of those interest you, that would be the next step for me, is like a practical application like that. If building a website sounds interesting to you, then maybe that's where you should go next. Or if data science and analyzing data or doing machine learning is interesting, that's what you should look at next. But
I feel like data science is hard because like you don't run across problems in your everyday life that
well,
you're like, oh, I wonder how many salmon off this industrial line are 21 centimeters and we need this data science thing to figure that out. Like, it's weird.
No, but I think you can think about like, think of simple basic data science, like your budget and your expenses, and can I analyze that and graph it, visualize it? Like there's a lot of data visualization problems that can be interesting. And I think, I mean, like one of the books that I really liked was like Automate the Boring Stuff with Python. And it's not like I'm saying, oh, go read that book and do all the examples, but just like the mindset behind it, is if there's anything that interests you in your life, like what I just said, like your budget, your calories. Like, do you want to look at any of this data? Like, maybe you can see if you can write a Python application for that.
There is no, there are many reasons why you would want to work on something. In my opinion, there is great resolve to go and automate something that you find incredibly tedious, or that you forget very often. At one point in my job, I was really bad at filling out timesheets, and my timesheets are the same every week. They maybe change twice a year. It's just I worked this amount of time on this project, this amount of time on this project. I don't even set those hours. I'm told, hey, you work 50-50 on these two things. And there's so many weeks that come to Friday that, hey, you haven't turned your timesheets in. It's really easy to use something like Selenium to go in and I need you to open this URL, click this button, and I need you to run that on Wednesday at 3 p.m. because my laptop will be open, and just run it in the background and then give me a little notification saying if something failed. Otherwise, I know my timesheets are always done.
Love it. If anybody, Michael gets arrested for some sort of time card fraud, none of y'all heard that.
Just hypothetical, just so my employer knows, nope. I do not actually do this. This was at a previous
one
job.
extra hour in each week for scripting the time card mechanism. That's billable hours that you're missing out on.
If you do something like that, don't do it on company time. That's all I will say.
There you go. There you go.
You're saving yourself time.
Exactly. Company overhead. There you go.
How long does it take you to automate something? Honestly, if it takes you more time to build it than you will save in a year, maybe don't automate it. Also, do not spend 6 hours debugging something when it could take you 5 minutes to look it up in the documentation. Two very good rules of thumb. Sir, you need to make an automation course, like how to automate something in Python.
Yeah.
We had someone asking about cron earlier, like, during the application or script command, and I think that's a cron or some of these other kind of task managers is something that could be really useful when you're starting out, but sometimes the syntax or just how do I actually set this up could be pretty useful.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very true.
Well, if you want to do a talk where I was trying to come up with an automation example that I could briefly cover in the talk today, but what I thought of, just a simple example, was let's say you wanted to organize the files in your downloads folder into like images, documents, and software, and then like miscellaneous other stuff. So you would have a script that looks at the file extension and just moves it into folders like every so often throughout the day. Like that was kind of like a very simple one I was thinking of. I don't know if it would be interesting to do something where like we looked at a couple examples like that or something. I don't know. Like a talk, but maybe a couple people could show their ideas. I don't know.
That sounds really neat. I keep thinking to my incredibly bloated downloads folder as a thing that could use some automation.
Yeah, something to automatically delete like those 400 installers that are just sitting in there.
Yeah.
If dot with glob star.img if downloaded older than 1 day auto delete.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or like Firefox decides I keep needing to download these PDFs instead of just opening it in the browser window. Like, yeah, let's just wipe all those out.
Yeah, really just delete everything, but maybe it's just better to organize your desktop. I don't know, but
Oh, it's a great thing for someone who's beginning. As long as you are not removing files from the system, pretty much no error that Python will get you into is going to actually ruin your computer.
yeah.
Very important to tell people.
Yeah. One of my first jobs was like a C++ programmer, but I didn't know C++ that well because I learned Java in college, and I accidentally did like I thought I was reading, and I was like, what's this W in quotes for? Well, I was actually writing over files repeatedly, and somebody came to my desk and said, why are you writing over all these large maps that we have? So that was embarrassing.
Whoops.
Yeah.
Those were important, right?
Yeah. Anyway.
That's why we have Git. If you're a newbie, what's Git?
Accurate.
I think of all of the academics or anyone that has to write a lot of papers and not having Git or some other kind of version history, because I remember before I learned how to program, having version 1, draft, final number 2, really final.
Yeah, I pretty much dread having to use like Office and things like that. I mean, at least Google Docs gives it history, but still, I want to be writing in Markdown that I can put into version control, like LaTeX or something. No one else uses that, so it's very annoying. Michael, you know what we should do a talk on? How to learn programming without destroying yourself and your computer. It's like you're saying, not deleting your entire operating system or overwriting your company's very important files.
That doesn't happen.
Maybe it does. I don't know. Maybe people are running into this. Maybe there's a fear that people are going to run into that.
No.
There's enough sci-fi movies that computers take over things, and it doesn't happen as often as people think. And so you shouldn't be afraid of that. Your toaster won't come alive.
It is very true. You don't realize until you actually start programming that computers are incredibly stupid. They will do exactly what you tell them to, exactly what you tell them to. You can tell a child to go put the milk in the fridge. You need to tell a computer, go to the fridge, turn right 90 degrees, go forward 2 feet. Well, okay, what's 2 feet? Well, that's 3 rotations on your wheels. Now I need you to open the door. Oh, you need to put your arm forward. You need to close your fingers. It's going to do exactly what you tell it to.
There might be a library for that.
How do you put an elephant in the fridge? Well, you open the door, you put the elephant in, you close the door.
Problems up.
There are very few times when I've encountered something that could potentially have ruined my computer, at least temporarily. One of them actually was doing some async programming work. Whenever you make a web call to, and it's going to download the response, like you're downloading a file, you're doing making calls out to APIs and that sort of thing. Something that it does under the hood is that while that connection is open, it has a file-like object that takes some amount of address space on the machine. And that way it can receive the information, it can write it to a temporary file, and then it has it available to you when you do .json to actually read the contents. But there's a limited size, there's a limited number of connections, simultaneous connections that this computer, or at the very least Python and the underlying operating system can make at any given time. Well, I told my computer to make about 100,000 simultaneous web calls because I didn't do my async checks properly. And I got a message, an error message saying that my computer had run out of file descriptors. And that meant that it wasn't able to open, load, read, receive any files or incoming web connections anymore. My computer, it had enough time to display that error message and then froze, and it took a full reboot to actually fix that. This is one of the only times I've ever experienced something where my code actually broke my computer, where I needed to reboot it.
Yeah, that's
That
great.
sucks.
That's actually,
Similar happened. Go ahead, Des.
no, that's actually really helpful. Because that sounds like something that I would probably do. What would you recommend to mitigate that? Because if you're doing web scraping, right, you may not have a limit to like how much, like what you're telling the computer to do. So like, do you recommend like using like some type of external storage space, or like what would you recommend just in general with those type of programs?
So the main issue there is that the computer crashed because it tried to do too much at once. And the only reason why that was possible is because I was leveraging the async IO library to do tasks in parallel, and it did too many parallel tasks. Your computer only has a certain number of cores, it only has a certain number of threads that it can run. Async, one of the things that async IO can do is it uses an event loop to try to, while it's waiting for a response to come back from the website, well, it can launch a new one. It can do other things locally. You can use the same tools to mitigate that as you do for, you only have a certain number of threads and cores on the hardware of your machine, and that's using queues of some variety. A queue is just going to be, it's a list. When I put something in, it's going to be the next thing that gets taken out. Think about an attraction at Disney World that has, it can only get so many cars through in an hour. And the amount of people that are queuing up to ride that ride varies. Well, that's the same sort of operation that you would have inside of a computer. You can have 10 workers, and you know that for your task, your computer is not going to break if only 10 workers are running things at a time. And then you can just keep adding on information to this queue, and you're not going to exceed the limits that you've set when you're running this information. There are third-party libraries that can do this. I think it's PyQt is one of the big ones. I can double check that, but any kind of queuing library. No, it's not PyQt. That's a GUI.
Counter suggestion. I would actually say go ahead and just make these mistakes, because I'll bet Michael learned a lot more about the problem just by having this mistake and learning about, oh, apparently you can only do 300,000 things at once before my computer shits the bed. And so then you probably learn a lot of things in the process and have fun. And it's like, there's very few things that are going to cause permanent damage. Like, you have too many files, like you filled up your hard drive. All right, you just delete all that stuff and start over again. No big deal. But you'd learn a lot in the process. So it's fun to have these happy little accidents, I think.
Okay. Sure. Yeah, I was worried about permanent damage.
I really don't think there's permanently damaging.
You need to be doing some higher level things to actually try to damage your computer. The first thing that you could do to potentially damage your computer is when you start playing around with the file system and you're deleting, and if you're trying to delete things on an automated basis and you start in the root directory or the C drive, you may run into some issues. But if you still want to do things like that and you want to make sure you're not going to destroy anything important, you can always get something like a Raspberry Pi, where a $35 computer, you put your operating system on an SD card. It has Python pre-installed on it. It's meant to teach people how to program. Like Like Raspberry Pis were originally designed for education, and then and then it just got adopted and just used in a ton of projects nowadays. You can do whatever you want on that computer. If it totally quits on you, well, then you just take that SD card out, pop it into your real computer, rewrite the operating system, use the Raspberry Pi's tooling. They have the Raspberry Pi Foundation has an image writer where you say, I want the Raspberry Pi operating system on this SD card, overwrite it, pop it back in. You now have a fresh install of that operating system, and you just, okay, what happened? Let me learn again.
All right. Thanks for those answers, guys.
I have a question. We have a question in the chat about creating a development environment for Windows, Linux, desktop. It also says VMs like in VirtualBox or even an EC2 instance. I'm going to say most of that is probably too much for beginners. I think you'll agree with me. Like there are so many tools nowadays where beginners definitely do not need to have an EC2 instance, for example, or even need to use VirtualBox. VirtualBox might be good if you're trying to, if you're learning SQL or Mongo and you want a local install of that. The Raspberry Pi is probably the biggest kind of standalone thing that I just mentioned. You could do whatever you want on that, and you're not going to destroy your main machine, and it's really easy to reset it. On your local machine, though, as long as you are not working with a file system, there really isn't so much that so much destruction you can do. But it is good to have a virtual environment, like for pip installs specifically. Like I use Anaconda as an environment manager, but venv I believe comes as part of the standard library in Python, and you can use that to kind of like how npm for the JavaScript world. When you do npm install, it actually just creates the node packages folder in the project directory. That's basically what venv does with Python for all of your Python, your pip installs as well. That is probably the best way for a beginner to really use a development environment, in my opinion. And we have people talking about using VM. So yeah, VM vent, initializing things that way. It really is getting used to that, and then you can start using more powerful tools later on down the line. Just don't use system Python. Do not pip install into your system Python if it comes on if you have a Mac or Linux, because there are core libraries on your operating system that use Python, and if you remove a library if you remove or change a library that it relies on, you may have some weird things going on your OS. That is a very common beginner thing to do, because as easy as it is to say, hey, Python comes on every computer, you can start playing with it right away. As soon as you start saying, hey, you should use pip, that's when you should stop using that.
So a question on that. You use Python every day, right? And you probably work with other people that use Python. Are virtual environments and pip like useful for that on a daily basis? What would you rather use? You mentioned Anaconda as your virtual environment manager.
So the two big things that absolutely, and depending on what you're using it for, you'll get used to and prefer one over the others. The biggest thing to me to not using the built in Python isn't even you shouldn't do it because it may mess up your computer once you start, especially maybe not installing, but removing pip libraries from that environment, is when a new version of Python comes out, you want to use the new one. If I think on the Macs nowadays, I think it comes to it's either 3.8 or 3.9, but 3.10 came out in November, and especially if there are features in the new one that you want to use, or if you are maintaining a library that other people use, you want to make sure that it works with older and newer and even preview builds of new ones, because you want to stay ahead of any breaking changes. Virtual environments are the easiest way to not only isolate and manage your pip installs, but the Python language version itself. If you know that a breaking change is coming up in the language, you can always just create a new virtual environment, download Python 3.11.0 Alpha 1, and test to see if that initial public alpha release, if all of your code runs fine. And if it doesn't, you know what to fix months ahead before anyone is actually going to get their hands on the final release build. And then to clean up, when a new version comes out, you just delete the virtual environment and it's gone. You haven't touched any of your other versions in your other projects or the system Python. Anaconda for me has two main advantages over virtualenv, in my opinion. The first one is it has pre-built binaries for a lot of the scientific computing libraries. If you download and build scikit-learn from source, from scratch, and so yeah, that is the only time that I've ever been told that my Fortran compiler has been out of date. And when I just do a conda install for that library, I know that I won't need to worry about that because it sees that I am running macOS something on Apple Silicon, and it already has the binaries for me to download, and it's a much faster install that way. The other thing is the virtual environment, VM, it puts it in a single repository similar to NPM with node packages. Anaconda lives in a separate library, a separate location on your computer. So I actually have multiple projects that are in the same environment, and they can all share them. We are coming to time, and I see that Sarah is.
Sorry, we have to go
ready to
for
sign
our
off.
kids' bedtime. Sorry. I know, they're the worst.
No, this was a fantastic talk and discussion. I really liked all the questions that we got. This was great. Thank you so much for giving the talk and starting the conversation.
Oh
So,
yeah, thank you for having me and letting me. Yeah, I was a little nervous. The Zoom format is so weird, but yeah, it was fun. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely, yeah. We've been doing this for 2 years now. It takes some getting used to, but the video quality has been great that we've been uploading.
Yeah.
For sure. Thanks, everybody. It's good to see you. We'll be back soon.